Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. If you're not watching this on the new WatchBox app, you're doing it all wrong. New features available on the Apple App Store or Google Play. You'll see WatchBox Studios content 1 week early, exclusive on the app. Plus, you can read editorial content from our own Jack Foster and your favorite third-party watch journals, magazines, and blogs. Also, shop our inventory, browse 3,000 pre-owned and vintage luxury watches while also storing your collection, including details of condition, box, and papers. Finally, stay in touch with me, my team, and our entire family of WatchBox client advisors around the world. I'm Tim, and I'll see you on the app. Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. Today is Alumni Day, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome back car enthusiast and watch collector Drew Coblitz. Drew, welcome back to the show. I guess this is part 3, right?
I guess this is part 3, absolutely, yeah.
So some new things here. Post-COVID, we did the original shoots back in 2020. We're a little bit closer together, but also we have new watches, and I think this one's not new, but it's going to be new to the audience, and it's got a powerful story behind it. Tell me a little bit about this one.
So this Jaeger Memovox was my grandfather's watch, and sure he wore it more when I was much younger, and then he kind of put it aside, and he was wearing another Patek, an Ellipse, and it was a really cool watch actually. But anyways, that watch sat aside, and he passed away in '97, and then about 6-7 years later, my grandmother knew that I was really interested in the watches, or really into watches. I had started growing my collection, and she said, well, do you want one of your grandfather's watches? Which I think is every watch guy's like, oh my God, yes. And she came out with this watch, but when she brought it out, it was definitely a watch that had been, it's a late 60s-ish watch that I bet was never serviced and was definitely not serviced by the time she pulled it out. So the leather strap was decaying. The dial had just not patina, but it was degrading. It was not great. So when I got it, I took it to a watch store, and I had them send it to Jaeger and have them do an absolute full restoration of the watch. I didn't really care about originality as much as I just said, just make it look really nice and new because I want to wear it like my grandfather wore this. And it took a good year and change, and Jaeger sent it back, and they said, this is actually a pretty special watch. I said, thank you, I really like it. But they presented it almost completely as new, which is super interesting because now looking at, what Jaeger has done over the past year and a half, where they're literally doing the same thing, and then charging a very interesting amount, but they seem to sell out. They did that effectively to this, years and years before. So I wear this for special occasions, and the alarm does still work. Definitely a different sound, but it's family.
Now, there's some things I can tell just technically about the watch from looking at it. I can see it's a reference E855. I can feel that it's a bumper automatic, probably K815, and all of that is just generic to these watches. But something very specific about this, considering we're both Americans, is that it's Jaeger-LeCoultre branded, and in the American market, it would have been LeCoultre. So this says something about your grandpa's life, because he didn't buy this domestically.
Yeah, no, he was military, and he was stationed in quite a few places, so I would imagine at some point he bought it on his travels, which make total sense. You know way more about this watch than I do. I even tried Googling all sorts of different features of it, and at that time I can't imagine they put out that many watches. So I could never find one that was kind of identical, and I just always thought that was interesting.
And it's really fun because I think sometimes with older watches, that stuff that really ties us to the owner and like their story. Because my grandpa's retirement watch from Remington Electric Shaver said 25 years on the back. And he spent 25 years fixing consumer electronics. That part of the watch is specific to him. Everything else is just generic Omega. So I think it's really cool that you've got the JLC branded market
for the international customer, but for an American owner, an American family. I think that's just so cool.
No, it's a beautiful watch.
And it's a good size for a vintage watch.
Yeah.
37.5 in the 1960s.
Which is pretty beefy. I'd imagine most of the watches were 34, 35, 36 millimeter at tops.
Yeah, little things. Actually, it's funny because that's not all that different from the Sebastian Ogier. This watch has been on the show before, but you've got some stories. Since the last time we featured this RM6702, it's been places.
This watch goes with me pretty much everywhere. It's still my ultimate sport watch in the historical definition of sport watch, which is wearing it when you play something aggressive, do something that you could damage normal things. Like whenever I'm on a racetrack, and it happens a few times a year, I wear this or the 6241, which is polar opposite probably of it, but still racing heritage, and I kind of enjoy that. But the fact that you wear this watch, and unless you make it your mission to destroy it, it does not take any damage whatsoever. And I like that. I mean, I've scratched watches before. It sucks. I can't tell you I don't like, that I'm totally fine with it. But that watch, I never have to worry about it. It's lighter than anything else I can wear. Previous to 2020, 2021, where, brands blew out of the water, this was the ultimate stealth wealth watch. Very few people recognized it at all. It's the ultimate wear anywhere, wear anytime, any event, and just a phenomenal thing. And I still have it because it is a watch that is a lifetime watch for me. I will never sell that watch.
We were talking about how you wear this in race cars, and seatbelt buckles, harnesses, door frames, roll bars. You've smacked this thing around. There isn't a single mark on it. This TPT carbon, they say you could gouge it with a razor and it would break the razor.
It's the one watch that even has effect. If you had carpeting right here, even without the carpeting, but if you did, I would drop it in front of a camera, happily do it, and it won't make my heart skip a remote beat. It's that kind of watch.
And it is really cool seeing how it's put together. They actually scoop out the sapphire on the back to create a recess for the rotor. And like you said, it doesn't immediately register as an RM because it is so thin.
Yeah, it's thin in this particular. The NTPT coloring. Thankfully now a lot of other companies have come out with carbon cases and darker looking watches. So it's not, other than if you know to look for it. If you know me and you know this, then you maybe would notice it. But I rarely have anyone ever notice that watch, and especially when it's on one of the darker color straps, and I tend to keep it on something more neutral. That watch is my ultimate tool watch.
And only 32 grams.
Yeah.
You must be just glancing at your wrist in panic to make sure it's still there.
When I first got it for the first, this is back now in early 2019. When I first got it, multiple times a day, I was like, oh wait, I don't. Oh, it's there, it's fine. But after that, I just got used to, I got used to it. And then they've also redone their strap design at least a couple times since I've had it. So this is now their most updated strap for this watch. Stays cleaner. I like the general texturing of it. And they changed a little bit of their sizing. So I do know it's on there, but yeah, everyone that I've ever let try that watch, it's changed their paradigm of sport, lightness. People would always equate weight to quality. So a gold Rolex was this was epic quality kind of thing. This just turns that totally 180. The lighter it is, the more kind of technologically interesting, the more kind of
less is more.
Flat out.
And what I really love, and I've only ever seen this on moon watches and RMs, why don't more true luxury brands give you Velcro straps?
I love it. I've seen more and more companies actually start to embrace using that, and they're all independent. They're all where you already know whatever you're buying is already, it's interesting enough. It's not it has to have an oh my god bracelet, but having I like straps on most of the watches that I wear all the time, and it is one of the most comfortable straps, bar none. Putting it on is just super easy. I never have to worry about it coming undone. Never.
And infinitely adjustable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's funny, you mentioned independent brands doing that. The only other time we went with a Velcro strap on a luxury watch, that, again, wasn't a moon watch for an RM, it was a custom order for a Devon Tread of all things. So now, speaking of straps, this is an interesting one because at first glance, it looks like it might be carbon fiber. And for that matter, so does the dial. This is a very sporty dress watch.
Yeah.
It's also a 2023 model. Why were you an early adopter?
I do like the idea of having one somewhat semi-formal watch, but if I have a semi-formal watch, I kind of want to have it also speak to I like sporty stuff.
Yeah.
And I also like the idea that this was one of the design babies, so to speak, of I believe one of Terry's children, like as far as like making it a little bit fresher and newer. And I like the previous 6007, the blue limited edition steel that came out a couple years ago when I tried it. I thought it was great, but I like little hits of color. I think like little bits and pieces of pop make a watch cool enough that you want to wear it, but then as long as it's just a pop and it's not the whole thing, it's good for a lot of years. You don't get tired of it.
Yeah,
you know?
It's not like cloyingly colorful.
No, but it's just enough. And I like that they came out with a red and a yellow and a blue, and I think the red works. I mean, it works the best for me, but I also think it works pretty well within brand. The bright blue actually looks really interesting, but I don't think it goes with as much like what you're going to wear around it. The yellow, really sporty, really cool, but there's just kind of something about the red accent-wise that I really like. And you really notice the red secondhand, actually more than almost anything. That and then the red stitch, which, one of my gripes with Patek has been their straps are pretty, very, very classic for the most part.
Orthodox.
And this was just totally different. And I've definitely heard people say, oh, that looks like the Alibaba thing. This is a common theme nowadays. But on the wrist, I don't see it like that. Nor are you getting a leather strap that looks like that. You'll get a plastic strap that's been embossed or something, plastic or rubber. But that's a leather strap that's actually been made to look pretty convincingly.
And it feels like it too.
It really does.
I'll be honest.
I mean, yeah, it's cool. And I mean, dial, another thing that I was reading, some people said, oh, for that kind of watch caliber, a watch of that caliber should have a hand done dial instead of a printed. And okay, but I love that carbon fiber texture.
It's like a skeuomorph. It's like a symbolic carbon fiber, not the real thing.
Yeah, and I like that. And it's kind of one of those. I mean, guilloche wouldn't work the same way here. I mean, could someone maybe do it? I don't know. But I don't. When it's on my wrist and I look at it, I don't for a minute think, the fact it's stamped that really just crushes it for me. I just like what they did with bringing up I would not wear a normal Calatrava in most circumstances just because it's not my style. But what they did with this was they spiced it up just enough in ways that I think are cool to wear. I actually now wear this watch every day. Like this is my absolute daily right now.
And it's interesting because you trace the lineage of this design back to 1992 in the reference 5000. Then in 2005, you come out with the 6000. That becomes the 6006. And it was always considered to be the sportiest Calatrava.
Yeah.
Radially arrayed numerals, big, strong, arcing lugs. And people always said it had overtones of automotive imagery, like a 1950s Mercedes-Benz or Porsche speedometer or tachometer.
Yeah.
And I feel like with this version, the 6007, Patek has finally leaned into that and embraced it. It is now the car Calatrava.
Yeah, and I love that, and because I'm like, my cars are my my other thing aside from watches. Anything that has a tie, and most of my watches have some sort of tie to automotive. If it's not with the watch itself, it's who I got it from, or a linkage there. But for me, that's just a cool car-related Calatrava, and I have cars that have stitch that are very similar, and one that I'm doing is a special project that will also have stitch that's actually almost identical to that. And so it just kind of caught my eye. I also like the wider lugs. I think these are 22 millimeter lugs, which that was something that I actually like. I think it makes it a totally different looking Calatrava versus having kind of your standard smaller lugs, which with a smaller leather strap.
Well,
this brings it new.
The lugs, the more it looks like a vintage watch.
Yes, which is I love vintage, obviously, but in this watch, I like the modern I like the modern interface here. I think it's really cool.
I would also say this. Something you mentioned before we came on camera really struck me. You said you would wear this in any casual situation where you'd normally wear a sports watch.
Yeah.
And this is a gold dress watch.
Yeah, yep.
So
Quite cool.
You would wear it where you'd wear the Ogier or the 5726 or even the Royal Oak.
Absolutely. With that, I mean, I wear this in t-shirt and jeans. It looks so cool. And one of the reasons I think it manages to bridge that gap is actually that strap. Because it just looks sporty. But if I wore it with a suit, it would still look absolutely phenomenal. And that little pop of color, I think it'd be, it's just a perfect little thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. The 5000 and 6000 series Calatravas have always been odd ducks, but in the best possible way. It's almost like, I would call this an all-arounder. Like, this is not a dress watch, it's not a sports watch, it's an all-arounder. Yeah. It's like a standard motorcycle, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not a dirt bike, it's not a sport bike, it's just the one you want all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you are now getting deeper into design in your own right, and when we first did our series in your garage, I was looking in your old, I think it was your 87 911, and there was a door jamb artwork of what looked like a T-Rex, but I wasn't sure. Tell me about Derpy, and then we'll get to how Derpy has actually become a bit of a franchise.
Yeah. Years ago, I drew an absolutely miserable drawing that was meant as a tattoo for someone who actually ended up getting that. And I just thought, oh my God, this is somewhat hilarious, somewhat scary. For the heck of it, I'm just going to go and draw like a bunch of other stuff because now I'm like, all right, this is kind of funny and I like things that are just funny, like embracing the silly is kind of my thing in general. So I ended up drawing a couple others, and then one of them I drew was this little T-Rex. And this one actually looked like a cute, pretty decently well done one as far as like a child's drawing.
Like a caricature.
Yeah, I mean, so I drew that. And I'm having the conversation in New York at the Audemars boutique with my guy there, Kevin, and he's like, it's really cute. Like, this is really funny. And I was like, yeah, but you guys do custom rotors, right? And he's like, yeah, we do. We do them from time to time at least. We can only do it on a couple watches. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I think it's on the jumbo and on the perpetual, right? And he's like, yeah, those are the two. I'm like, well, it'd be pretty awesome to do, like, do you think you guys could do my dinosaur on the rotor of a jumbo? Like, so if I get on the list for a jumbo, you do that. Could we make that happen? And he's like, interesting. Let me go talk to some people. Let me go run design by, can you shoot me a PDF of whatever it is of the drawing? And, I was like, yeah, sure. So I sent it to him, and, he after a month or two, he's like, so they think they can do that. That shouldn't be the thing. The thing will just be fine, like an allocation for a jumbo, because at that point they are annoyingly difficult to get. And I was like, okay, I'm happy to wait. And this is circa 2019 when all of this starts. So fast forward 2022. They say that the 15202 is being discontinued. They're going to do a new one, and I sent him a text. I was like, oh well, would have been cool to have it in there because I like the idea of having it have the old movement, the historical movement in it. But whatever, maybe we can do it on a new one. And he's like, hold up, I'm not totally, this still has a chance. And I was like, okay, I don't, whatever. 3 months later, or 2 or 3 months later, he says, get your credit card out. I've got like a very, very, very late 15202 with you, and it's approved to do the custom rotor. And I was just like, okay, awesome. This is super, super cool. So then I go through back and forth designing this rotor, which I never thought there were so many little things that you could do, design-wise with a rotor space. But I learned this as I'm going back and forth on emails weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks out.
Like one half a postage
Oh
stamp.
my gosh. I mean, there where locations where, I mean, if you want, initials, if you want another statement, you want, what direction, where, I mean, there is a lot that they can do. So there's actually an awful lot that goes into rotor design that I didn't know about, aside from obviously you need the rotor to spin around enough, layman's, kind of deal. So I go back and forth with the guys there, and they're phenomenal. We develop and design the rotor. And then, I end up getting a picture of the rotor being done by the guy at the shop in you know, at whichever one of the facilities that they had it done, which was super like amazing to see. Anyways, goes back in the watch, and at the end of the day, it ends up being like 2022 when I take delivery of this, long after the 15202 ST has been discontinued. So it ends up being that watch is I mean, they think it's the last delivered 15202 that they've done to any boutique, just by definition of timing, which I just think is really cool in history. And the dinosaur rotor came out so unbelievably well that, like, I mean, I can't tell you how, like, unbelievably excited I was with this and still am. This is another thing that I'll have, like, for my entire life.
Yeah, you better, because it's engraved with your initials and your dinosaur.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the guys that actually everyone that helped make this at Audemars, like, they enjoyed the story. I know a bunch of people saw it online, and I got some very interesting messages from some really, really cool people about it. Yeah, so I mean, in just in the sense of like making a watch yours, like that is like my ultimate version of that. And I at a point I would like to do a fully bespoke Royal Oak with them in kind of growing this, like, you know, designing some interesting stuff. But yeah, that story is still one of my favorites, like absolutely without a doubt and bar none. And that stemmed more stuff that I'm now working on.
And, you know, it's interesting to me because a lot of the watches that are most interesting in your collection are the ones that come with great stories. This was an odyssey that started, I mean, just the watch order, never mind the artwork. But in 2019 and 2022, you finally get a huge send-off from the company itself. You take delivery. It's very special. It's exactly what you imagined. With RM, there have been all sorts of track day events, RM manufacturer events, and of course, all the places you've worn this and not disfigured it. You have your grandfather's watch, all of those memories. You really do associate experiences with watches more than most collectors. A lot of your watches are forever watches too, because I recognize some of these familiar faces, but this one is new. You have said it's a forever watch. Why? I have to know.
So at the end of the day, whenever anyone asks if I could have one watch and that was it, and let's just say it's the watch for the watch's design and not something that, like, I've had any kind of impact on at all, I still think almost any iteration of Newman Daytona, Newman dial Daytona, fancy dial, you know, Daytona is one of the most perfectly proportioned sport watches that's just ever been made. It works in any situation. You know, they're relatively simple. So I also do wear this in cars on the track, and, you know, if something happens, then so be it. You know, I'll have it repaired. You know, dial is what I'm most concerned about anyways with this. So as long as something doesn't really go wrong, you know, the watch is still kind of, you know, it is what it is. But it's also like having Newman's history it's not even just as race car driver, just having Newman as such a car enthusiast for so long. And I mean, even...
and he was a legitimate race car driver. He was a winner, not just a guy who paid to race.
He was, no, but you know, it's just one of those, but he also did it 100% because he loved it. But it became his life. He modified Volvos, you know, and made them hot Volvo wagons, like, for the heck of it. You just don't get a lot of car guys that actually do, like, the silly stuff, you know, kind of because. And I've always had a thing with that. He just, you know, he kind of embodied a lot of that cool. And Steve McQueen, you know, is another automotive cool guy. Just a different thing. Like, I don't know, Newman just has a special factor. And the fact that, you know, history ended up going forward, and, you know, the 6239, you know, watch sold for, you know, whatever it did, you know, the 17 mil with taxes or whatever. There's just kind of something about it did that because of the cool factor and not solely because of, you know, merits of, you know, of the watch alone. And that lore, that story is definitely a part of the fun. So I had a 6263 Big Red. That was a really nice, cool, you know, awesome watch. But it didn't really have any of that, you know, link or story to it, at least to me. And I ended up getting a call from one of my friends. And long story short, I ended up trading a car and my 6263 for this watch, which is also just kind of a funny thing in general, like, just for me as a car and watch guy, that this would involve, like, trading both of them, into this. And it's one of those where like the moment I put it on my wrist, I was like, it's perfect. It just is perfect.
And I do get the sense, and this is interesting to me, that you're not really a vintage car guy. The 87 Porsche was the earliest car I've ever seen in your collection, but you do go for vintage watches, and a big driver of that is the story and the legend. You've actually got a decent amount of vintage even just on the table today.
Yeah.
So what endears you to these old watches? Is it who might have owned them, or the association with motorsports, or the specific personality, or maybe the story you're going to write with them? Is it all of that?
I mean, there are definitely bits and pieces of that. The other thing is, I like the idea that, in the sense that with the 6702, I don't really have to worry about damage with it. There's something about a vintage watch, unless it's a totally new old stock thing, where it's got enough kind of marks and character to them that, like, if I add a little bit more, that actually does add to its story. Versus, when you nick a, like the 5726 and you put a ding in the bezel, and basically the only thing I remember with that is what caused the ding, and it's not normally something I like to remember. But with vintage, that aesthetic just works with it, and it kind of grows. I think it grows the cool factor with the watch. And I wear everything that I have. If I stop wearing it, at that point, I don't really need to keep it too much, because, my story with it stops. But yeah, so it's funny, this watch, I ended up getting because I bought a car from a vintage watch dealer, Adam. And I mean, Adam's an awesome guy. And I was just going to go look at watches that he had in Miami, and it turned out he had a 98 Diablo SV that he was had co-ownership with a dealer down there. And I had just driven a friend of mine's Diablo SVR, which is such a wild-looking car. But I drive his SVR, which is literally a race car. And I drive it. I'm like, this is actually a pretty easy thing to drive, relatively speaking, for what it is. I really like it. Whatever. I'm at dinner with Adam talking about watches, and he's like, well, it'd be really nice that you want to buy a car. Or I'm like, okay, well, I like cars. What is it? He's like, it's a Diablo SV. I'm like, stop. Like, I literally just drove this other one 3 weeks ago. I'm thinking, like, this is an interesting car. I maybe want to, I'd want to own. I think it's got a big future and investment,
but also, it's the driver's Diablo.
Without a doubt. But I mean, it can go into the Diablo more, that specific one. But I mean, yeah, that got the short gearbox. It got more horsepower. It was the first year of ABS. I'm not sure if it works, but it's still cool to have it.
Rear-wheel drive, lighter weight, a simpler Diablo.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and but it is a phenomenal car to drive. But all this aside, I mean, when he said it, I'm like, okay, wow, this is actually really interesting. So I ended up looking at the car. I made a deal with them for it. I still have that car. I'm in love with it. But then I actually went to go look at watches, that he had, and he had this 5513 there, and it's a 68 5513, which is just also coincidental because that 6241 is also a 68. And it's one of those, like, everyone, it's one of those, it's got the ghost bezel that just looks really good. I mean, whether it was originally on the watch or not, it doesn't really matter to me. The dial patina is perfect. The coloring just is what you kind of think about when you think about a 60s 5513. And the rivet bracelet was, like, stellar condition. Everything was super cool. I'm like, all right, well, this is kind of fun. I mean, do the car. He definitely hooked me up, on this. So, like, I look at this and I look at the car and I love them kind of together. I mean, would I have bought the watch without doing the car? Maybe, but kind of the fact, like, when I bought that car, like, to kind of do that with it, I like that. Like, that's part of my story.
But that's very cool, because I think a lot of these, like, you've got, this is the Augier, that's where it started. This, of course, is the Newman, that's where it started. These watches that have, larger than life reputations and legends eventually become very, very personal to you, where you have these individual stories about how the watch really became yours. Something else might have led you to it. I'm sure this wasn't the first time you'd seen a vintage sub, but it has a very personal story attached to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a Sea Dweller that, a 70s Sea Dweller that I love, and that was on, I think, the last time I was on with you. And, like, that has a very different story. But yeah, when I saw this in conjunction with the with the car, I was like, all right, this is just super, super, super cool.
And this is an unbelievable example. The bevels are all intact on the lugs. You got a 7206 bracelet with almost no stretch. I've seen 90s Rolexes with more stretch than this, and this is a 1966 bracelet. I mean, just unbelievable. I know you've got kind of a wabi-sabi philosophy towards your vintage watches, like beauty and imperfection, but they're pretty damn good.
I like having my mix,
Okay, speaking of dichotomies, you've got the combination of the watches that don't scratch at all and the watches where you're okay taking a nick. This is more of a combination of the very serious and the very silly, but it's done with top-of-the-line quality.
Yeah.
Why orange and how?
Okay, so I mean, first, just even with the watch, the 5726 to me is just one of the. I think it's the Nautilus that. Well, it's the Nautilus that I want to have long term. The 5711 I think is a nice classic watch, and I had one, and I actually got pretty bored of it pretty quickly. I had 5990, 5980, and for some reason, it didn't gel as much. I do think Patek. I mean, it's definitely not just me. Complication and Patek go together pretty damn well. And just because something's a sport watch doesn't mean it can't have a little bit of that. So after I had the 5711, I had a 5726 on a strap like this. And at that time, I was kind of in the mode of just having like one watch or a couple watches and then, trading for different things. So I ended up letting it go. And years later, I kind of realized, you know what? I do want to have a Nautilus. I still love the watch. Hype aside, it's a cool watch to have. I like the idea that these are kind of like a more a kind of a better sized offshore. It's almost the Patek offshore kind of style.
It's to the Nautilus what the offshore is to the Royal Oak.
Exactly right. And at all that combined with an annual calendar, which is the useful complication for me.
And Patek's own invention.
And their own invention, absolutely correct. I just think that's the one that's kind of cool at the end of the day. And that model on a bracelet, I think, is very nice. But that on straps, and now with the different aftermarket rubber straps that you can put on them, I think it just pops those watches so well, and it just makes it that extra level cool. And my friend's company, Horus, makes these specific rubber straps for the Patek, for the Nautilus line, and I think they're coming out with Aquanaut and Royal Oaks, et cetera, et cetera. But they are the best aftermarket rubber straps I've actually ever put on any of my watches. Like, the fit is off the charts. The material is soft. I mean, you have it. You can,
but
happy
robust
to say,
too.
But it's just amazing how bright orange. They have a red. They have a blue that's a vivid blue. They have a carbon fiber print. It changes that watch. So it takes the this thing that you maybe could get that's a very conservative design, and just throws it into like the I put that almost next to almost next to the RM as far as being like a spunky sport. Granted, I am way more careful when I wear the Nautilus, because that edge is one of the edges where I have no shame in saying I really try my best to.
You imagine a force field around your wrist as you walk along.
Yeah, and it's definitely had its social embarrassment ramifications of me, holding my arm here, in a crowd or something like that. I'm like, yeah, I look silly, but whatever.
I've done the same thing. We've all done the same thing. Sometimes with much less success than you.
Yeah.
But it does transform the watch, because you get almost like a raffish, irreverent, like Richard Mille kind of character, where you've got the super premium watch, but a very relaxed attitude about how it's presented. It almost makes the RM with kind of a staid gray strap look more conservative.
Yeah.
And all this is just done with what, a $200-300 strap?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And these guys are, I since then I've become friends with Mark and his crew, and he's another one of the people that I was mentioning the Derpy story to, actually over dinner with a few other collectors. And it was just one of those dude, let's figure something out. Like, this is really awesome. And they make a carbon fiber print over rubber strap that, hearing it, you think, it's probably not going to look that great. I saw it and I was like, this looks amazing. I mean, it looks really carbon fiber, save the reflective kind of aspects of it. And we've put together actually a version of a derpy strap, so to speak. I've come up with a pattern. We actually have the prototypes, and we'll end up having that available sometime in the fall. So all just from stories, like just from telling stories of this watch and of the drawing in the car led to just creating another product. And
it's almost ironic in that you've got this little dinosaur repeating as a motif. From about an arm's length, it looks like scales. You get closer and you realize it's a cartoon reptile.
Yeah. And I mean, it was one of those, I was looking at houndstooth because I've had houndstooth in some of the cars and I've seen it on a bunch of others. And I was like, that's really just a connected pattern. I mean, it's not, and it's kind of edgy or, angled, whatever. I'm like, well, how would that look if I just repeat my little drawing? And I had one of my friends do a mock-up of it in general, and I was like, I've created my own Pepita, but it's this little, it's T-Rex Pepita.
I'm looking forward to that because I'll tell you,
Yeah.
I've been in this industry a long time. Injection molding is tough to do. When I first saw this, I actually asked you, is this OEM Patek? Because it looks that good.
Yeah.
It fits that well. That's a very,
it really does.
very cool piece. And is that publicly available? If someone else wanted to do this color on this
Yes,
watch?
this is publicly available. You can get it right through Horace's website. So yeah, they do well.
Now, it does not seem that your collection includes a ton of super premeditated purchases. This took a while just because of the process, but
Yep.
It seems like you decided pretty quickly that you wanted the watch. So given that you often operate on short horizons for new acquisitions, what interests you now? What are you looking at? Preferably if it's something you haven't been into before. What's on your mind now as a collector?
I actually am I'm really interested to see the new De Bethune 39mm watch. I am enjoying dipping into some independent world a little bit more than I kind of was before, but I love the articulating case of the De Bethunes, but some of the historical ones were just a little bit big for me. So I really like the idea of having all of the aesthetic and all of that function, but just a little bit pared down size-wise. So I think that's definitely a direction I'm leaning towards for trying. I mean, there's also stuff that I want to see where I kind of need to hold it first. I do want to see the new LV tambour. I'm interested in seeing it. I like things that a lot of people kind of instantly write off. I always think that's an interesting kind of, something that the watch can either, live up to, what people say.
But you like
or,
to defy the cynics.
I enjoy it. I enjoy it. There are some things that, there are some watches that basically everyone loves, and that's totally fine. And I have watches that I'm a fan of with that. But there's something about that I think is super, super interesting. And also, you got to look back at Bulgari, years before. I don't remember when the first, do you know when the first the Octo Finissimo came out?
I think the series started in 2014, so not all that long ago, less than a decade.
So before 2014, Bulgari, 100% fashion watch. I mean, they did some Genta stuff, but for the most part, fashion. Now, you say Bulgari, and you have a company that's now made multiple award-winning watches, some of the thinnest watches, ever. Some of the lightest, some of the most interesting. I mean, they have transformed their brand perception, especially to me, but I'd imagine to not just me. They've managed to do that transformation over effectively 10 years. So you now have, LV, which is definitely not a hierology, brand in history for that. And now you've got someone that wants to, take them there. And that's a challenge. It's one thing for Patek to come out with another really, really gorgeous, amazing ultra complication. And that's a whole level of difficulty that, it's incredible. But it's another thing to take a brand that's known for one thing and even just start nudging it, in another direction. And I actually think that's an awesome thing. I have a lot of respect for Jean. I'm super excited to actually see the watch. And that's also one of those things where I like the idea of wearing it as I would with other, in a race car, in other things, as you know what? Like, of all the things to wear, this is what I'm wearing because it's interesting, it's different. Like, I like stuff that not everyone has, but not necessarily it's not because of the cost or because of anything else. It's just something that other people don't, either don't believe in or it's just not how they would wear it.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing. Rolex, GMT, okay, well, this time the crown is on the left side. And people are like, oh, it's sensational. It takes a lot to change the inertia of a huge historic name that's not associated with high luxury watches. Bulgari did that. LV's doing that. That's on your radar. Daytona Red 100, are you down?
100%. I'm absolutely in, without a doubt. They put together too many things in one watch to where I'm like, all right, if they just did this, maybe. If they just did this, maybe. They just did this, I don't know, maybe. They put it all together. At the end of the day, the dial is still the biggest thing for me. Having that and knowing how I feel kind of with that new version is the ultimate new version of this watch. And I actually do put them at parity just in modern and vintage. The moment I saw it, I'm like, okay, I'm screwed. I'm making phone calls. I'm doing whatever. Like anything I can do, on that, would be phenomenal. The fact that they made it a 24-hour, they made it a 24-hour camp to actually cover the 24 hours of racing.
A 24-hour Paul Newman modern day Rolex Daytona.
Yeah, I mean that's like saying, hey, here's your, describe your, your dream girl as a whatever, and every single bit of it. Oh, and here you go. That's it.
And 100 years of the race, they made the 100 red. And of course, it's the year Ferrari comes back after half a century and wins. Now, they could have said if Toyota won, it's Toyota red. Maybe they could have argued it was Guards red if Porsche won. But you see red 100 on a Le Mans watch, you think Ferrari, and somehow they played it perfectly.
Yeah, and I mean, admittedly, it's cool. I can't not want that, unbelievably. If they made it titanium, that would have maybe been the only thing they could have done that I would have enjoyed more with it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely killer.
You wouldn't be selling cars; you'd be selling kidneys at that point.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt.
For that one.
I think I can get away with 1.5 kidneys out. So at that point it would probably work. But we'll see. Otherwise, is there anything else that comes to mind?
No, it's okay. Good. Save something for part 4. You know what I mean?
Good point. Oh, we have to actually do it when the Emery is back.
Yeah, that's fact.
Finally.
We're going to go back to the garage in the future, folks. Drew, thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely, Tim. Total pleasure.